Hi, this is Denise Donaldson from Safe Ride News Publications. I want to start by mentioning that this presentation is going to build on a LATCH Manual 101 presentation that's actually posted on the CPS board website under Community Education. So that presentation covers where the LATCH Manual information comes from and the book's layout, so you can get your bearings for finding your way around the book. But for this presentation, I wanted to highlight some of the more technical information that's CE worthy. So while this presentation definitely stands alone just fine, I just wanted to let you know that most techs will likely benefit from being able to go back to that CPS board website and checking out the 101 presentation as well. And this is just a little bit about me, and the most important thing here at the bottom, while I'm currently proud to be serving a term on the National CPS board, I'm not representing the board today. And as always, I like to start by stressing that the LATCH Manual is just one of many resources that CPSTs should always consult. So you'll want to check the instructions for both the car and the car seat, as well as the car seat labels, and things like videos and FAQs on the manufacturer's websites can be super helpful as well. The LATCH Manual shown here is gray. There really isn't a gray LATCH Manual, but I made it gray for this because every 2 years when a new edition comes out, you want to be sure to use the one with the correct cover color. And although the content is just constantly under review and may change with every new edition, we do strive to keep the main format of the book the same with each edition. So the people who've taken all this time to learn how to find things in the manual can use those same skills in future editions. So that's what this webinar is going to do. We're going to refer to certain concepts and the section or chapter you're going to find them in. And we don't need to go into too much about the details because those could actually change as we continually review the manual. But so you're not going to see the actual page number, but kind of where you're going to find things. So like I explained in the 101 webinar that's posted at CPS board website, there are 4 basic sections of the LATCH Manual that you ought to know about. It starts with 8 chapters that are written by us at Safe Ride News, and there is some input from manufacturers, and then that's followed by appendices, which have information that's provided directly from the vehicle and car seat manufacturers. So for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to just highlight a few of the useful details of each of these sections. So it's really going to be like a random sampling of only a few of the features, but focusing especially on some points I get asked about a lot or that I myself refer to often. And before we get started, I do want to point out that when we make the LATCH Manual, we work really hard to make sure we use consistent terminology. And so those terms can be found in the glossary at the beginning. So this can be a really useful place to review terms in general, but certainly if you see something in the body of the LATCH Manual that doesn't make sense or looks unfamiliar, you should definitely go check out the glossary at the front. So, okay, let's flip to the front of the book where the chapters are. And so that's me kind of flipping and using these markers to find the parts of the book that we're going to look at. And it's just as a reminder, when I say those chapters, I mean these 8 sections of the book, which are organized by topic. And we're not going to go through chapter by chapter here today, but definitely I urge you to take a look at these. You're going to have a much better grounding and understanding certainly of LATCH and even of car seats in general by checking these chapters. So the things I will kind of just wander around and talk about, the first thing I want to show you is this LATCH phase-in table. And it's a pretty simple table, but because I find myself referring back to it often, I felt like it was something I really wanted to point out to other people because, if I'm looking at it, I bet you need to look at it as well. Because as the years pass by, since LATCH was first introduced, we kind of forget what happened back then. And while it tends to be pretty straightforward for us now to kind of think of LATCH as coming in around 2003, you can see at the beginning the specifics are a little less clear-cut. For instance, you have tether anchors and tethers on car seats required much earlier. Way back September 99 is when the child restraints started to have them, and they were phased in over a couple years for the tether anchors. And then there was also a phase-in period for the LATCH system itself So there were several cars, 20% in 2001, 50% had to have them in 2002. So it's not just something that hard starts at 2003. You really need to understand that there was a phase in. So when you see an older car, you may or may not have latch in it. You also need to understand about the distinction between a calendar year versus a model year. So in recent years, the auto industry's model year cycle has become a lot more blurry. But back when latch was introduced, the requirements that for latch began in September of each phasing year, because back then that aligned with the start of a new model year for the following year. So for instance, if we say model year 2003, this could be as early as a car made in September 2002 or October 2002 or something like that. So as time passes, we run into these older vehicles less often, but when I do come across one, it helps me to be reminded of these phase-in milestones. So I've got an idea of what I can expect regarding lower and tether anchors. And of course, there are vehicles that are exempt from FMVSS 225, as well as some that were given exceptions to the phase-in schedule. So if you see a vehicle that seems like it's not properly equipped with latch based on its age and the phase-in timeline from that table, then you can flip to Chapter 8 to see if there might be an exemption or an exception that the vehicle you're working with might fall into. And here's something else I find kind of useful to check now and again. I imagine most technicians aren't aware of, because in Chapter 1, there's a succinct one-pager about using a seat belt to install car seats. And that's kind of a backwards, when latch isn't an option or just isn't used, this is how we would install a car seat. So it's a nice one-pager, but the reason I find myself turning back to this one at times is that there's this section on belt shortening clips. And that's something that was kind of rare back even in the day for older cars, but now it's of course even less on the top of our mind. So when we do run into these situations, which CPSTs sometimes do, it helps to know where to get the appropriate clip and to confirm that the manufacturer's actual part number, so you know it's an actual belt shortening clip and not actually a locking clip. And just as an aside on this point, I've posted a video showing how to use a belt shortener at saferidenews.com. So if you're completely unfamiliar with this procedure, or you just want to brush up on it, or if you have a family that needs to do that and you aren't there in person to explain to them, you can refer to that. You can also even use it if you're doing a CEU session for your group and you want to add that to it. You're certainly welcome to go check it out. It's under resources and then SRN video and visual tips at saferidenews.com. So moving along, there are a few topics I'd like to point out that are in Chapter 3. And the first is this description of handed connectors, which are those ones that have to change sides of the car seat if the latch strap is changed between rear and forward facing. So by and large, on car seats with both rear and forward facing belt pads, these have been replaced over the years by what's called a non-handed connector, which is a redesigned type that should not switch sides between modes, so it's easier to use when making that transition. However, handed connectors do still exist on some convertible car seats that are in use today, and even on brand new ones. And in a way, because they are relatively rare, that makes it even more important for us to stress this all the more, because that makes it more possible that when a tech sees this, they're not going to be familiar with it. So let's take a closer look at that. What actually makes the connector handed or non-handed, it's not actually the connector itself, but the placement of the webbing attachment point on the connector. So over here on this original design, the webbing attaches alongside here on the side. And then you can see the same type in the photo above as well. So this is a key fit, right? And it only has one belt path, so it has this regular handed connector on it. But on a convertible car seat, when you switch sides, when you switch modes, you'd have to switch the direction. And so we have the non-handed type option over here, which changes so that the attachment point isn't on the side, but actually onto the bottom part here. And so what that does is means you still have to, of course, do the adjustment so that you've moved it to the different belt path as you change it around. But as you do so, you don't also have to go through all the steps to switch to the opposite belt path for each of the connectors, in order to make sure that the heavy pawl, the heavy tooth, which you can kind of see here on that, it's a little blurry, but you can see the heavy tooth. You of course always want that heavy side, and you can see the bigger part of the connector too, plastic. You want that to go over the top and not under, and if you don't do that switching of the sides, it'll leave it upside down. And the other problem too is that the adjuster will be on the wrong, it'll be facing inward if you don't switch the sides. And so that's a job you have to do when you have a handed connector. Besides the, it's a little painstaking even to move it between the belt paths, let alone get it swapped on the sides. So that's where this non-handed type came in real handy, so we don't have to worry about that. But do note the reason they designed it this way in the first place was that when it is lined up correctly, it's a nice smooth line, and that looks right to us, right? Because we don't want to have twists or folds in our webbing. When you have a non-handed connector, which again today most convertible and all-in-ones do have this, but not all. But when you have this type, this is why you now see a little bit of it's like a half twist right coming off. That's the kind of trade-off we have there, and it's perfectly normal and it's not a problem. So here's an example from a Kokoro. Now, this is always described in the latch manual, by the way. So when there is a car seat that needs the switching, you can actually check the latch manual, and it's going to describe that, it's going to identify it as actually a handed or not a handed connector. So I wanted to show in an owner's manual that has this type what this might look like, and this is an example for the Combi Kokoro. On this model, changing the modes involves bringing the whole lower anchor attachment assembly outside of the belt path, and that's kind of shown in this circle in this, that's what they're trying to show here. So it's actually brought outside the car seat, and then the parts of the instructions that ensure that the strap is routed correctly are kind of underlined here. So they say here, with latch connector slot on the bottom and red release button on side away from car seat, place lower anchor belt into the rear. So they aren't saying anything about handedness, they're just telling you how to line it up. So their procedure in this particular model is to bring it all outside and then make sure it's straight. Other car seats are going to be different. They also do warn, check that the strap is not twisted when you do this. So between the illustrations and the description, I think that I'd say these instructions would seem to do the job for this particular model, but still you can see how an owner or even an experienced CPST could get kind of confused by these types of instructions, or even overlook these important details altogether. So the latch manual kind of provides a backup to all that. So bottom line, you need to know about handed connectors because while they've become rare, they still do exist. On any car seat with rear and forward facing mode, you might see it. And understanding them more completely is going to make it easier for you to educate caregivers about it. And then of course for them to learn how to do it. So also I want to note that the part in chapter 3 is going to give you kind of like a little text. You can also go to the glossary. That's going to give a even kind of shortened version and some pictures of that. And then the details for particular car seats again would be in Appendix A. So we're still in chapter 3. I'd also like to point out step 6 in that chapter's step-by-step approach to using latch that talks about attaching the lower anchor connectors. In particular, something that many people ask about is at the beginning of this section, which is whether a seatbelt and the lower anchor attachment can be used simultaneously to install a car seat. So as we know, the answer to that question is almost always no. We're pretty regularly saying don't use both. But since there are some exceptions on both the car seat and the vehicle side, there's that rare situation where those two come together and you can say, okay, it can be done. So you're going to find the listing of the vehicles and the car seat manufacturers that do allow both on in these sections. So you have the vehicle side, the car seat side. So again, always check chapter 3 when you have those questions. That is less likely. On the car seat side, it's going to be an Appendix A. On the vehicle side, it is not in Appendix B. So you'll find it here. So that's one of the reasons you go to chapter 3 kind of regularly. Okay, and there's also a section in chapter 3 that talks about those plastic guides that can be added to help open the seat bight so that lower anchor connectors can find the lower anchor bars more easily. And these are useful only in some vehicles, like ones where the bars are recessed a bit. They're not really going to be helpful when the bars are set near or forward to the bight. And you really only should use it with car seats that have either the rigid connectors or the push-on connectors like I was showing over here, either handed or non-handed, rather than the hook-on types. Okay, and in this section you can get a mini tutorial on this and learn which manufacturers of both cars and car seats sell or provide these add-ons. And there's also instructions and an image of how they should be installed onto the lower anchor bar. This might be a good point to note, by the way, that this whole section was actually added to the LATCH manual several editions ago at request of instructor Jenny Rollins, she contacted me and said, hey, we should have this in the LATCH manual, and that was just a great idea and an example of why the improvements that come into the LATCH manual are frequently driven by you guys in the field. So I also wanted to try and point this out. After doing some virtual checkups and kind of sitting at my desk helplessly while I watched caregivers kind of struggle just trying to connect flexible lower connectors, I thought this step-by-step guide in chapter 3 might be something that could be used to help. And of course, some struggle can be part of the learning process for the caregiver. So I don't mean to invalidate the struggle entirely. It's great. Virtual, they need to learn how to do it on their own, and that's all good. But too often I see caregivers put the car seat in place. And then of course, what do you do next? You climb in over the top of it and kind of contort your body over the top of it to attach the inner lower connector. And that can sometimes be a little bit challenging. So this box here is going to provide some steps that allow you to place the car seat and get the in a way that it's not so hard to attach the connectors. So I'll just kind of describe it verbally, and like I said, there's a step-by-step. People don't always like to read things. One of my ideas I want to do in a future LATCH manual, and maybe by the time you're listening to, you might even find the next LATCH manual will have this, but would be to have a video you can go to look at this. But I'll just describe it now. So if you place the car seat upright but sideways on the vehicle seat first, with a forward-facing seat turned away from you and a rear-facing seat turned toward you, then you attach the connector that's closest to the vehicle seat back at that point to its lower connector, which is going to be that one that's farther away. And you do that first, and then once that's attached, you then move the car seat into its proper use position, and then you only have the connector that's closer to you left to attach. And if you've never tried this, check the instructions out and give it a try next time. It's a simple tip, but it can make that whole process seem so much more dignified, right? So much simpler, so that you don't have to start right off with this struggle of blindly trying to get that connector attached. And these instructions could even be sent out to caregivers in writing, if you're not there to help them with it. And then you could flip to the next page to check out a series of tips for things to try when it's difficult to tighten a strap. So now, with experience, I think CPSTs do generally develop an intelligence around shortening straps to remove slack, because you work with them a lot. So you learn how to work with adjusters and locking mechanisms. But I've been an instructor long enough to know that this knowledge is not second nature to most people. You really have to practice a lot. So this part in chapter 3 talks about things to think about to be more successful when you're trying to remove slack from webbing when installing a car seat with latch. So in particular, it's going to talk about a concept I call pulling smart, which is just to say to grasp the strap from a position of strength and being close to the adjuster and from the correct side. You don't want to be pulling away from yourself. You're much stronger if you're pulling toward yourself. And then make sure that the way you pull the strap is directly away from the adjuster and at the appropriate angle so that your effort will actually result in the strap sliding through the adjuster mechanism. And I know this sounds so simple, but I very frequently see people, including techs, putting tons of energy into completely ineffective attempts to shorten a strap, like pulling away from the car seat, for instance. Whereas taking a moment to stop and think about how to pull smart this way can really help in every situation. It's actually helpful for seatbelt installation too. So if you find yourself struggling to tighten a typical latch strap, or you want to find the words to explain it to a caregiver, you can read this section, and if you find it still difficult, I would further recommend basically playing with the adjuster before ever attaching it to the lower anchor bars. And from this, you can sometimes be better able to see what direction you got to pull that loose end of the strap to make the installation strap shorter. And then it's just a matter of replicating that movement, that angle, when the connectors are actually attached to the lower anchors. All right, and what latch manual presentation would be complete without emphasis on tethering? And in fact, of the 8 chapters, 4 of them, chapters 4 through 7, are specifically about various aspects of tethering. But I'll point out this first page of chapter 4 as a good resource for simply promoting the concept of tethering. It's going to include a rundown of various studies that have established the safety benefit of tethering in tethering cars, as well as some key quotes from NHTSA's update to FMVSS 213 back in 2012. So if you're ever looking for support as to why tethering forward-facing car seats is so important, this is the place to look. And by the way, citations for any studies that are mentioned anywhere in the LATCH manual are found on the very last page of Appendix C, right before the index, so way at the back of the book. Okay, so now let's start moving into those appendices of the book, which are really chock full of information. But for this presentation, I'm going to continue to focus on parts of these sections that might help you with tethering, because I got to find some place to focus. There's just too much to go over in a short presentation. So we're going to start with Appendix A. I'm sorry that the picture shows Appendix C, but again, we're going to these long lines. So if I was looking for Appendix A, it'd be the first long line, and so I'd flip to that, and considering all the various topics of tethering, one of the many interesting things to consider is the various way that tether extenders are mentioned as a useful way to help route a tether in some challenging situations. So not to be confused with a seatbelt extender. Those are always a no-no for installing car seats in cars. So not a seatbelt extender, but a tether extender, one that's made by a manufacturer. Those can be quite useful when used in ways that are approved by the manufacturer. So one way, of course, they can be used is to be a tether extender, to add length to the strap that can't otherwise reach a particular tether anchor location. So, you can picture especially in older cars, you might have in a SUV a location that's far away from the car seat. And some brands have shortened their tether straps in recent years. So when a matchup occurs between one of those and a tether anchor that's far from the top of the seat back, then it's sometimes necessary to contact the manufacturer to get an extender. And of course, not every manufacturer offers one. So in Appendix A, each manufacturer has an opportunity to indicate if they have one, as in this example, Britax shows that they do have one. But there are some other less obvious uses for tether extenders as well, and I feel like these sort of fall into that category of next level tips that we as CPSTs can teach the public to help them be successful in tethering in some of those trickier situations. So for instance, in this entry from Appendix A, Evenflow gives another use that, and this is key, is approved by Evenflow. So in cases in which a tether's adjuster is a type that's too big to go through a tight space, like under some head restraints or through certain tether routers, like in a pickup truck, a tether extender can be attached to the tether and slipped through the tight space to connect it to the car seat's shortened tether strap without requiring that tether adjuster, which is the bulky part that has a hard time going through the space, to go through there. So as explained, step 1 is to fully shorten the tether strap itself. And I just want to make sure I'm showing you this. This is an example on a pickup truck where the adjuster can't get through the intended router loop. And then this is a head restraint that happens to be in a Volvo where they have these really narrow, and no matter how you turn this particular type of adjuster, you can't get it to go through. So those are some of those tricky situations. So you want to fully shorten the tether strap. I'm going to go forward here and just see. Yeah, okay. So the first step is to let me go forward. Fully shorten the tether strap itself, so that you're actually going to let the tether adjuster, tether extender do the job. So in this picture, you can see this is the car seat. Here's the head restraint. I know this is a little blurry, but I've made it so short that the hook is just barely sticking up. It's not trying to go through that narrow space. And then you take the tether extender, and this is a drawing of it, of course, but the tether extender is going to hook onto the tether on the car seat here, and then this becomes the length that you're trying to get to the tether anchor of the vehicle. And key though is that this little part is just a little thin piece. There's no big bulky adjuster on it. So I can attach this end to the part in the car and then bring that skinny piece that fits through all those small spaces and attach it to the car seat. So it's quite helpful to be able to do that. And that's also described in general terms in Chapter 5. So like that little mini tutorial kind of idea, you can see there it talks about, also you can find something that shows the various sizes of that tether adjuster hardware that's sometimes difficult to get through. And you know, a lot of times these small spaces, there's a small tether adjuster, they slide right through, no problem. So this is a solution to those matchups between a particular car seat that happens to have used the maybe a little more bulky adjusters, and making it work in those tight spaces so that we can be successful to tether even in those situations. And really key here is the fact that the tether extender that's used in this case, and this is one from using for the Maestro Sport, that's an Evenflow product. I got this extender from Evenflow, and it has to have the adjuster mechanism on it, right? Because if I've shortened this one all the way up and then I put this one through and attached it, I need this adjuster to be able to now make this a nice tight installation. So just be aware, there are some manufacturers that do have tether extenders but that don't have an adjuster. You're still expected to do the adjusting on the car seat itself. So that type will not help you in these tight squeezes, but many of the tight squeeze situations can be solved with the tether extender from the company. And now here's another helpful tip as well from, well, this is an example of using that with a Britax, and this actual image is from the Britax Appendix A entry. So these are approved images from Britax. So in this case, the extender is used to solve a potential problem of a V-shaped or 3-point tether on a relatively wide car seat, so that those 2 points are far out, but when the seat itself has a relatively narrow, like it would be a narrow captain's chair. So this is an example of a picture from a 2006 GMC Savannah, which actually doesn't even show this as being a problem. But you can imagine if a car seat was tethered like this with a V-shaped tether, those two straps could just pull right forward, and that is not going to be an effective use of a tether. So we want them to stay up on what we think of as kind of the shoulders of this seat. And if there's some risk of it sliding off, then there are a couple approved ways to fix it that you can see here. One is to use the tether extender, and this is an example of one that doesn't have an adjuster, right? We're still adjusting with this part here, but the point of the tether extender is that we've turned that wide V into more of a Y, and because of that, it's going to have a sharper angle here and keep it really gripping the top of that seat, so it's not going to slide off those shoulders. And if you don't happen to have one of the tether extenders and you're worried about this problem, it is also an approved to use this tail end to kind of tie off and do a similar thing with making the tether that's from the car seat itself more into a Y. So that's approved as well. But I also wanted to point out that while this tip can be useful in particular problem situations, it definitely is not going to be done in every situation in which a V tether is used on a captain's chair. So in this situation, the seat back, you can see, is plenty wide. So we can see that the so-called shoulders of the seat easily hold that V tether. And so you really would not even need to do this. And this is probably because this is not necessarily one of your wider seats, so you have a wide enough captain's chair and a narrow enough car seat matching up. So it's really one of those situations where you have usually it's the combination models for bigger kids, so that's going to be a wider V on particular seats that have slopey shoulders or they're particularly narrow. So don't assume that you'd need to do every case. So there's so much more in Appendix A that could be covered, even just focusing on tethering. But for this presentation, I'll finish off this Appendix A by pointing out that there's a quick reference table at the beginning, and there are actually two. And this table A shown here lists all the car seats that require tethering. So I mentioned it mentioned it in the 101 presentation as well, but I wanted to draw a little more attention to it here, in particular because, you know, just to be clear, all of this detail is also in each of these manufacturers' listing or entry in Appendix A. But it kind of tells us an interesting story when put all together, because it shows those various reasons why a tether might be required. So first, you can see car seats for special needs. Those are exempt from the tether list testing of FMVSS 213. So special needs, forward-facing car seat models all require tether use and frequently have some sort of special kind of ingenious way to tether, including maybe even just routing the seatbelt in a way that makes it act as a tether, or maybe even requiring two tethers or employing two tether hooks when the child weighs more than a certain threshold. But then there are some conventional models that go to high weights that require tethering during the certain of the highest. And these are mostly, today you'd find mostly car seats are only going to be sold that end at 65 pounds. But you may recall not long ago and still out there in use are many models that went to higher weights, even as high as, well, frequently to 80 pounds, and we had a couple even higher. So many times those require tether use over 65 pounds. And of course, all forward-facing Durrell models since 2017 require tethering per the instructions. So you can go to the Durrell entry to see all of its brands, which include Safety First, Costco, Maxi Cozy, those kind of over that parent company of Durrell. And so this kind of gives an interesting synopsis of tethering requirements overall. And, you know, for that matter, it's going to let you know any of the exceptions too. So we try to give a complete picture here, but if you need more detail, go to the actual entry in Appendix A for that manufacturer. And a second quick reference table at the front of Appendix A tells the story of latch and boosters. And as techs know, latch is not required on boosters, but manufacturers can optionally equip boosters with latch, and they often do. And of course, combination and all-in-one models are going to have latch. So when they go into booster mode, you're going to need to know, do we store those parts? Do we remove them? Or can they possibly still be used? And the case in favor of using latch with a booster includes stabilizing the seat when you're loading and unloading the child, as well as securing it so it wouldn't be a projectile if unoccupied in a crash. And since with a booster, it's the seat belt, not the booster, that holds the child and takes any crash load, you don't have to worry about the child's weight limit, because there's never a weight limit for using latch with a booster. But we do still have to find out if it's okay with the manufacturer to use latch, because in some cases it's not. So some cases there are manufacturers that have combination and all-in-ones where you'd have latch there, but they would say don't use it when it's in booster mode. And for that matter, sometimes it's okay to use the lower anchor attachment part, but not the tether. Or maybe they want you to always use both. If you use one, you must use the other. So, and that's mainly what you want to really be looking into. Oh. All right, so I think we're going to move on now to vehicle information in Appendix B. So again, still on kind of talking about tethering, there's one area that affects tethering a lot in cars, because it seems like it's pretty straightforward, but then you get in the actual vehicle and you have this head restraint that's kind of blocking the way. And just kind of some background, head restraints aren't actually required in the vehicle, but when they are present, which they usually are, they must meet all the requirements of FMVSS 202, which includes certain features that help them work well for their intended purpose of preventing whiplash in adult passengers. So you want them to be situated close enough to the head, etc. But as techs know, this can mean that they sometimes make routing a tether challenging, and not as a latch thing necessarily, but just as a car seat thing. They can also kind of push out and get in the way of tall car seats. So since many vehicle manuals don't actually address head restraints with respect to car seats at all, or perhaps but they don't have all the details that we'd be interested in, the head restraint bullet in the section that precedes each vehicle brand's entry can be super helpful. So for instance, it's often desirable to remove a head restraint and stow it properly while a car seat is being used. Like if it's just too much in the way, can't I take it off? It might not say that in the car seat section of the owner's manual. So this bullet is going to give you generalized permission and allow you to know whether it's okay to take it off. And of course you'd want to also stow it. And we have it broken out here also by single strap tethers or by those V tethers, and where you'd route it around a head restraint, because it's not always, that's always, sometimes they talk about V-shaped tethers in the manuals for the vehicle, but often they don't. I'll let you know, a few of the vehicle manufacturers, Toyota's one of them, and there's others, but they've opted to only provide this detail in each of the vehicle specific model notes in their entry section. So you might, if you don't see a bullet there, you should see detail for every model in the down here, this notes section down here. So most though do give a generalized permission when it's a removable to take it out, those sorts of things, but read it carefully to make sure it's not the same for every one. So as I was saying, here's an example. Ford has a brand wide bullet. They do have that brand wide bullet, but the brand wide bullet's also going to say check for specific information. So for the Chevy Tahoe information on this page of Appendix B, you can see that there's model-specific head restraint advice, but only for certain model years and certain seating positions. So this model-specific information would supersede the general advice in the bulleted entry that's more general, unless the bullet includes a point that could supplement the note. So for in this instance, to clarify what to do if the tether is a V-shaped one. But notice here that the guidance is very different among model years, so always be sure to check these details, because we're still in Tahoe here, but this is a different model range. In more recent years, there's additional advice for the third row head restraints, which is quite different than the second row instructions. So, a Tahoe is not always the same. And along these same lines, the Honda CR-V, very, very popular family car, gives us another example. The tethering instructions for the model year grouping shown here are pulled from the Appendix B notes section for each grouping. And they show that while the model name remains the same, the advice is going to change as the model has been redesigned. And so this is just one of many examples of reasons I remind myself that no matter how long I've been doing this, there's just no way to memorize every situation. And it really makes no sense to try. Really, all I have to do is check the instructions. And in some cases, if in an owner's manual, it's an illustration that indicates how to route the tether relative to the head restraint. But in the latch manual, we like to put that into words. So that's what we show, whenever possible. And here's another example of how to use the bullet at the beginning of the Honda entry and how to make that help. So as you can see, the notes for the recent model years say to go between the head restraint legs, which is the term Honda uses for the posts that hold it in place. But the bullet will explain that Honda says to do what Honda says to do if the tether is a 3-point V-shaped one. You don't want to squeeze those together and go through. And instead it would say to go ahead and lay it along the outsides of the posts or legs if this is a more natural routing, so it gives you that permission. Of course, some head restraints are not adjustable or removable, so we call these fixed head restraints. And for the Latch Manual, we try to get detail about how to route the tether relative to these. So always check the bullets and the model specific notes for this kind of information. In some cases, the manufacturer says to go to one side or the other, and may even be specific about which side to go to. And also note to avoid a seatbelt or some other obstacle in some cases. And then still other models say to go right over the top of a fixed head restraint, but always confirm whether that's the case. So in general, I'd say that newer owner's manuals tend to be better than some of the older ones in terms of being clear about how to route tethers relative to head restraints. And I really like this Tesla Model S example a lot because it not only makes it really clear that Tesla intends for the tether to be routed in each of these 3 rear seats, it even notes that the top of the head restraint is deformable so that the tether will kind of squeeze in and stay in place right there centered on that head restraint, which is nice because it's not that wide, so you don't want it sliding off. And it also gives the users and technicians a great indicator as to when the tether has been tightened enough, because you should see the taut strap should show it creasing and making this little indentation. And the other thing I've noted recently is that the Model 3s have head restraints that look a lot like this, but their instructions do not show this, and they do not say to go over the top. So you really need to, again, they're not all the same. Okay, moving on. Another vehicle feature that we've grown to see a lot more often over the years is a cargo cover, and sometimes these do encroach on tethering as well. Compared to head restraints, where the Latch Manual often augments information provided in the owner's manual, I'd say that owner's manual almost, they really rarely discuss the cargo covers with respect to tethering, at least so far. So the Latch Manual can be really helpful on this point. Sometimes it's really not a problem. Sometimes you can slide between it, or if you open up the hatch, it creates room. But an issue arises when the cover is installed in a way that really truly abuts the seat back, especially when you can't remove it. In that case, if the tether anchor is on the seat back or in a cargo area, the cover can be in the way of routing the tether. So this image shows the only cargo cover casing I've ever come across that provides little notches that I assume was to anticipate tethering, because they line right up with those tether anchors indicated with those red. So I was pretty excited when I saw that in an auto show several years ago. But in ensuing model years, they actually removed those, so that was kind of sad. But what you don't want to do, if you don't have these little notches, you don't want to wrap the tether around, unless that's what they say to do. More often they're going to say to remove the cargo cover, which normally it might not be easy, or it might be easy, it just depends, but you want to move it out. Sometimes though, what you'd have to do is move the seat back forward, flip the seat forward temporarily to slide the tether through. But what you don't want to do is just wrap it around the cargo cover. You want to make a straight line as possible to get to your anchor. So on this point, if it's not in the model specific section, also make sure you look at this bullet that's in Appendix B at the beginning of a section. I'm just using Nissan as my example page here, but this would be in all different types. And that's going to let you know if any kind of warnings about cargo covers and what you're allowed to do. So for the last bits of this presentation, I'd like to highlight some additional details found in Appendix B model notes section that I found to be really helpful, especially when instructing remotely. So in general, please notice that all the model-specific notes always start with the number of tether anchors in the parentheses up here. So it starts with how many are in that vehicle, and then it goes on to say where to look for them. So that, a lot of times nowadays they're on the backs of seats, but there are other locations, and that's always going to be described where they would be. But there's much, much more that can be found in these notes, and I'll highlight only 3 of them in this presentation. First, note that Fiat Chrysler automobile brands, which now they've been bought, now they're kind of organized under Stellantis is the parent company, but it's still Fiat Chrysler US, and those brands are Chrysler, Dodge, Eagle, Fiat, Jeep, and Ram. And they volunteered information about when their vehicle models have seating positions where a load leg can't be deployed because there's a recessed area under the floor, making that floor less strong than it would be and potentially not strong enough to support crash loads from a load leg. So I say they volunteered this information because it's really not latch related. And while we try to keep the book focused on topics that are pertaining to latch, we do make exceptions, such as in this case when a manufacturer asks us to add content on a particular point they'd really like to emphasize to technicians. So like when certain information isn't clarified in the owner's manual, or when they see a spike in customer service inquiries. So this detail disallowing use of a load leg is helpful, but it's only provided for the Fiat Chrysler brands who volunteered it. And you can see that Fiat Chrysler has chosen to call these support legs, which is the same thing as a load leg, stability leg. This is all in the glossary actually, so if you're confused about the different terminology, you can always check there. So for the last latch manual, let's say subsequent latch manual after Fiat Chrysler offered this, we have been asking the manufacturers if there is any concern about a support leg, load leg in their vehicles, to please let us know. And so far we haven't gotten any of those, and we will continue to ask and check so that the manufacturer can pass along that information. The one we did hear from, it was actually from Honda on their Odyssey, saying you actually may use a load leg over their in-floor spare tire storage compartment that's between the first and second rows. So just be aware that there is some support or some information on support legs or stability legs or load legs, whatever you want to call them, in these notes, and that we do urge the vehicle manufacturers to uniformly let us know if there are any other concerns we should know, because that's not normally going to be in an owner's manual. Another surprisingly common note in Appendix B is about vehicle recalls related to latch, or in some cases we include serious recalls related to car seat use in general, if it's pretty important and the manufacturer wants us to note it. So when social distancing began, in one of my first virtual checkups, I taught a family who was using a Nuna Pippa and a BMW X3, and of course my first steps were to review each of the owner's manual, be all ready for it. But then I checked the latch manual and found that vehicle has a latch specific recall related to using rigid latch like we have on the Pippa. So that, of course, the owner had no idea about this, so I was super happy to be able to let him know before baby arrived, to have that checked out. And of course, just in general, it's a good idea to remind caregivers to enter their VIN. Check to Protect is a really good website that you can actually enter the VIN or the license plate number, because there are definitely many recalls that affect the safety of specifically our children or all passengers in general. So the last thing I want to point out is that there are notes in the notes section that point caregivers to, or point users to the use of the LATCH Gallery. And the LATCH Gallery is a freely available page or set of pages at saferidenews.com, our website. That's a way to show a more visual, along with text detail that could help you advance even beyond what's shown in the LATCH manual. So that's an example of it right there. If there is a note that says go to the Safe Ride News LATCH Gallery, this is about tether anchors, then you'll want to go to our website, and if you look under Latch, or there's actually a quick link at the bottom too, you can see Latch Gallery here. This is on a phone. On your computer it might look a little different, but either way you can view the gallery for tether anchors, view the gallery for lower anchors, and it's going to show you the various thumbnails, and you'll find the one that's in the Latch Manual. And we are constantly adding them, so there may be some additional ones since the Latch Manual, but we update that every time we do a Latch Manual. And at this point I put this in so I always remember to thank the incomparable Katrina Rose, who helps me with both the vehicle side of the Latch Manual as well as being a wonderful webmaster for me. So this is kind of what it ends up looking like on a phone, which I find kind of delightful because, you know, if I'm next to a car, I can scroll through that pretty quickly to find what I'm looking for. And then we get the details, and I like to show a picture from the owner's manual, as well as giving you a hint as to how to find something that was particularly tricky. So in this case, we're just showing that don't go through the bite there, even though it looks tempting to do so. It's actually down below in this very well hidden notch. There's some other points, like in general, when it comes to a high bite, you know, please look below a high bite. If you're digging around in a high, what I call a high bite, especially when the button's really close to that, it's tempting to do that. But frequently there's some clever way to find the lower anchors. And so, and you can see sometimes they even use zippers. Sometimes it's like a Velcro flap. And often when it's the first use of those Velcro flaps, you have to pull real hard to get those to come off. So if you see things out there though that aren't in the Latch Gallery, that's where it really is very helpful to us to hear from you. So if you think that it's like, wow, this needed more illustration, the owner's manual didn't show us enough, this was a little bit tricky, then you can actually click on this image submission, and from there you're going to get a input form, and it'll send it to us, and we will put together the whole thing that goes online. We just need your pictures and the information in the input form. All right, and so to wrap up, I just want to point out that this is a perfect time for you to take a Latch Manual quiz, by the way. Just go online to saferidenews.com, look under Latch, and as long as you get a score of 16 out of 20, you can earn a CEU for using the Latch Manual. You're going to need to have the manual with you to do this, though. Don't try to take this without the manual itself. There is a lot more about Latch that's freely available at our website under Latch, so just take note of that as well. I hope you will take time to kind of explore that at saferidenews.com. And this is my email address as well as Katrina's, and the number you can call to reach us. Please check us out at saferidenews.com, and we hope to hear from you in the field to give us your insights as to what you need for help with Latch.